treasure, any treasure that came in. They got an equal share of food, and the same kind of food. They got an equal vote on where to go, who to steal from, and when to call it quits. And that was unheard of in any other structure at the time, any other political structure, or the Royal Navy. So the captain was voted from their common number. And the captain only had authority in time of battle, when there was needed to be one voice, one person speaking, so that it wouldn't all go to hell. Very different from the Royal Navy, of course. We know like the hierarchical structures. And in the merchant marine, also very different. The merchant captains were often very brutal to their crews as well. Because when they sailed away from port, they were officially God's voice on their own wooden world. They could mete out horrible punishments at the drop of a hat, and often did. So the sailors serving in the merchant marine weren't much better off than those in the Navy. The only thing that they had different was regular dependable wages, depending on shares of the profits of the goods sold, right? But they didn't necessarily have a stake in the goods getting from place to place. So very often when a pirate ship would sail up to a merchant ship and hoist what we now know as the Jolly Roger, the skull and bones flag, the merchant crew would surrender. Because what would they be risking their lives for if they attacked the pirates? Not much. A tyrannical captain, some far distant investors back home, and a couple of bales of cotton, indigo, and rum, casks of rum in their hold. They wouldn't want to risk life in them. Now, of course, some were inspired to, but the majority of them would just surrender when pirates sailed up, because what did piracy have to offer them? Much different than their captain. Very often, after a single pirate haul, each man would make off with 1,000 pounds. Now, that's each man, that's not just the captain. 1,000 pounds is, in that time, more, it's about $1 million. It's more than, in today's buying power, but the wages back then were much, much more minimal. It was more than the average laborer would expect to see in an entire lifetime, or in generations. The average laborer's daily wage was 1 to 2 pounds. Yearly wage was 1 to 2 pounds. So, there was much more incentive for them to join the crews of the pirates. And they very often did. So, I think I've exhausted a lot of time here. Thank you all for listening. And is there any time for questions? Or?
Of course, if there are any questions or comments.
If there are any questions or comments, please, I'd love to address them.
Or go ahead, George.
I've heard, I don't know whether it's a myth, rumor, or fact, that so many pirates are seen with eye patches that this was not necessarily injury in battle. It was due to the fact that they ran up and down between the deck and the hold, which was very dark. And if you had an eye patch, you could rip it off and see below deck. Is that, have you run across that?
It's a very good theory, and it probably does work to some degree if you practically try it out. However, there is no period evidence and historical evidence from the first-hand accounts that indicates that this was the case. It was merely just happenstance. If somebody lost an eye, you wouldn't want to be walking around with this gaping hole, or giant scar, so they would put on an eye patch. Peg legs were real, absolutely. Eye patches were real, but more from the dangers that a sailor faced every day. Not necessarily, not at all for that, unfortunately. Yes?
What was big time in the piracy business from 1750 to modern day Somalia pirates?
What was big time? How do you mean?
Who were the players,
who were the players
between 1750 and
because there weren't, well, from what I know, because there weren't as many, because there wasn't nearly as much piracy than in the Golden Age. There were only a handful of pirates during that time, and only a handful well known. Now the British considered John Paul Jones a pirate, although the Americans would think of him as a heroic captain. Jean Lafitte, a Frenchman from New Orleans, was a pirate in the early 1820s. But to about the age of when steam was invented in the 1830s, 1840s, pirates only existed in very few and far between, nothing like to the world scale that we knew. There was, of course, a Chinese pirate during the Qing dynasty, a woman who controlled a fleet of 1,000 ships, and she was quite formidable in the late 1800s, but that's pretty much the only major players. Sui Hutong, I think, something like that, yeah. She sailed out of Singapore, I believe.
Yes.
So how much of it was a concern of the authorities of the economic impact of the pirates versus the concept of a democracy which would have threatened the establishment?
That was also a very strong thing. You see, I'm really glad you brought that up. It got to the point in 1717 or so, about 300 years ago, actually exactly 300 years ago, where the pirates in the West Indies became such a formidable force that the navies of Europe went from being unable to catch them to being afraid to encounter them. They were starting up something called the Pirates, they called it the Pirates Republic in what's now Nassau in the Bahamas. And it was a democratic zone, the likes of which the Founding Fathers of America would have been very proud of. It was run in the same way as a pirate ship, where all were equal, all got an equal share of treasure and votes on the daily affairs. There were about 5,000 pirates living there at its height, and it became the center for the base of operations for many things. So this did threaten the establishment to such a point, but it was eclipsed at the time by the most direct impact of their militaristic, of pirates' militaristic mobilization against cutting off all trade and being able to control the flow of trade between the New World and the Old World. However, it did threaten them because they were losing their workforce. The common laborers would flee from their ports to join the pirates when the pirates had reached their height, and even before that, because of the freedom and opportunity that they saw. So if it had not been quashed and quelled by a divide and conquer campaign that was devised by several rich merchants in Britain, which essentially offered a pardon for all pirates to return to society. Now they had a choice. They could come home. So those who were the diehards and were committed to it for life didn't want to. And those who had only ended up there on the wrong side of the law by accident or happenstance, many of them wanted to come back and see their families. Many of them wanted to come back to lives and civilization. So they did. And they ended up dividing and conquering the pirates by first giving them the option of this pardon to return to civilization, and then those who had taken the pardon, they commissioned to hunt down the remaining members of their old pirate gangs. So they all turned against each other, and it collapsed completely. So this was about 50 years before America, but many of the sentiments of the egalitarianism of piracy seeded the sentiments of the later American and French Revolution. Many pirates would still, if they'd escaped, or they had returned and taken the pardon, would still have been alive to see the American Revolution, including Anne Bonny, a famous female pirate. So it did have a large factor.
One last question, and then anybody else can come up and talk to him after you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You told us about governments that believe in outsourcing essential government services to privateers, and you told us about governments whose view of free trade is pillage and plunder. I'm wondering if you see any analogy to certain governments.
The captain would like to say no comment. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Zach. You are a font of information. I learned so much about the Caribbean that I never understood before. And I'm sure you have many more tales to tell. Indeed, I'm looking forward to your books. And a little token of our appreciation for your coming, a little tall ship.
Oh, how kind.
So if you have any more questions, please do stay afterwards and have a little chat, as long as you don't have to run somewhere immediately. And so, just to let you know, next week we will have John Summers, who is a museum professional, an educator and author, a maritime historian, and he'll speak about objects of desire or why pleasure boating History Matters. I will not be with you next week. Unfortunately, I have been called for jury duty.
Are you the
I have asked Al Ray to join us. I haven't heard back. I hope he'll be able to. But there will be some competent leader up here at the front. And then the following week, of course, is the tribute to George Cuthbertson. And that will be on the 29th, and I believe we will be in the new dining room at that time.